Welcome back to the CreaTech stage at the CogX Hybrid Festival 2021, co-curated with the Creative Industries Council, a forum between government and industry, which brings together all sectors of the creative industries, from advertising to architecture, film to fashion, games to music, performance to publishing. You can find out more about us at thecreativeindustries.co.uk. I'm Janet Hull, and I lead the CreaTech programme for the Creative Industries Council. And I'm also Director of Marketing Strategy at the IPA. And it's my pleasure to be your MC for the afternoon. And before we get into the programme, I want to thank our associate partners at CIC, Digital Catapult, Facebook, Moore Smith, and UKRI HRC for their support. We've got a fantastic programme ahead of us. Please share your thoughts and comments and get to know each other in the chat. Ask questions of the speakers through the Q&A, and on your social, please use the hashtags CreaTech UK and CogX 2021. First up this afternoon, Dream. Funded by UK Research and Innovation as part of the government's Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, Dream is one of 4 Audience of the Future demonstrator projects exploring the immersive future of the creative industries with new large-scale experiences for mass audiences. £40 million has been put into the development of these programs in virtual, augmented and mixed reality. Dream is a flagship project inspired by Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. It launched as a virtual performance earlier this year to great critical acclaim, and we're delighted to welcome today the core team who put it together, spearheaded by Sarah Ellis, Director of Digital Development at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Janet. It's really lovely to be here, and I introduce Nell Whitley from Marshmallow Laser Feast and Gabby Jenks from Manchester International Festival, and also recognise our other collaborator in the mix in Dream, which was the Philharmonia Orchestra. We embarked on one of the UKRI's Audience of the Future demonstrator programme, exploring the future of live performance. And it's been a huge privilege and delight to work on it over the past few years and deliver the piece Dream this March in a pandemic, in one of the most challenging times for live performance, and in one of the most exceptional times for us to find new ways to connect with audiences. Audiences are the heart of this experience, and the purpose of Audience of the Future has always been about how we find new connection points with them using the latest cutting edge immersive technology. Now, Gabby and I are going to share with you what we did. We're also going to have some time at the end for questions, and we're going to sort of share a presentation with you now on key aspects of that. Dream, as Janet says, was inspired by Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, but to quote another UK cultural icon, tomorrow belongs to those who see it coming. And it's in that spirit that we have, on Audience of the Future, developed this consortium, which was a collaboration between 14 partners from the creative industries, technology companies, and research partners. And it was deliberately set up in order to make sure that as we were exploring the future of live performance, we didn't just think about one form of R&D or one form of looking at live performance, but we worked with companies that were at the best in their field and could work with their audiences to imagine future ways of adopting immersive technologies in that space. So in the consortium, our creative partners were Punch Drunk, Philharmonia, Manchester International Festival, and Marshmallow Laser Feast. And with that, we worked with research partners to on a series of R&D questions that would allow us to think about how we can provide connection in real time. It's important to say that Dream has come at a moment where we were going to do a performance in Stratford-upon-Avon in 2020, in the summer of, and the pandemic stopped that just as we were about to go into final production. And in that moment, we had to completely rethink this project. And within that, we had to keep a consortium together at one of the most challenging times for what has been for many of our industries, disruptive and also challenging, but also has allowed us to completely rethink how we might connect in performance. And as we come out of this pandemic, Dream has thought about those things, and I think has celebrated the fact that we can design differently, think differently, collaborate differently, and welcome different people into our working practices to imagine what that future looks like. Dream is and will be released as a pre-recorded version next week to coincide with Midsummer. So we welcome you to experience it, and it will be available to the end of September. But the live version that went out in March was a live online performance set in a virtual midsummer forest. This forest was created and had a real world set of actors performing in it. It was based on the text from the play, so it wasn't a full performance of Shakespeare's text, but it was inspired and working with our head of literary at the RSC, Pippa Hill, and the dramaturgy that she lent to it from these scenes between Titania and the line from Theseus about imagining how we could be chased through the forest and embody ourselves through the forest. Within that, we had to completely rethink how you'd approach story and narrative in this space, and bringing together the best directors, practitioners. Robin McNicholas and Pippa Hill embarked on creating the story world that had to bring in new approaches to how we might write a script in this way. So here are 2 slides of how we brought that together, working with the storyboard artist Rob Pybus, looking at camera angle, notes in the virtual space, and the lines of the play that we wanted to bring into that to take you through to the storytelling of it. All of this culminated in 3 main areas, which were the story, the technology, and the audience. And I'm giving you a little overview now of the story, and I'm going to hand over to Nell now to start sharing how we approached the innovation and the key technologies involved in making Dream happen.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Hello, everybody. So it's worth saying that, as with all of the Audience of the Future demonstrator projects, this is about over 2 years worth of research culminating in a demonstrator project. And in fact, our consortium didn't just do one demonstrator, we did several demonstrators over the period of the research period, and Dream was by far the biggest endeavour that we did together. But it's definitely a culmination of independent research in our organisations that looked at different ways to explore immersive technologies with audiences. And I think it's also worth saying this is all about applied research and applied R&D. It was very much production focused R&D. So everything we did was about both trying the new and exploring things we hadn't done before, yet in a context we knew it was important for an audience to receive and understand and kind of generally get what we were trying to do. And, you know, to varying degrees of success, probably. So Sarah, you can go to the next slide. So there were 2 versions of this show, and I'm going to talk about both of them and kind of interchange them. But just for context, you could watch Dream as a passive audience member who basically had a live stream of the show, which was effectively seeing the virtual world we'd built that was completely controlled by the live action that was going on in our studio in Portsmouth. Or you could have bought a ticket and interacted with the show. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But ultimately, there was a conversation going between audience and actor in the interactive version. So you can go to the next slide. There was a key element of all of this research was that we were looking at live performance. The other demonstrator projects are looking at other things. So for us, everything was about liveness, exploring what that meant in a virtual world, exploring what that meant to audiences online at home, and exploring what it meant for the actors in the studio as well. And we created, effectively created an interactive stage, and then played between the live, or played between the interactive stage down in Portsmouth and this world we built, the virtual world in Unreal. You can go to the next slide. So this is just showing what the stage looked like. It was 7 by 7 meters physically in Portsmouth, and the virtual world that you can see on the LED screen behind the actors there is in fact a 7 kilometer by 7 kilometer forest. So everything we did was about translating 7 meters squared into 7 kilometers squared in our virtual world. And the actors performed in this volume, and I think you can go to the next slide. That should give us a video, Sarah, with any luck. So the actors were performing in this. You don't need the sound, I think you mute that. But the actors were performing in the stage, as you can see, and then everything they did translated both to the LED screen that they could engage with live in Portsmouth. But what we saw as the audience at home was just the content that you can see on the LED screen there. So virtual world was completely built in Unreal Engine. So from it's a games engine that some of you will know, Fortnite, etc. is all built in it, created by Epic Games, who are one of our partners. And where things got really interesting for us was where the kind of virtual and real worlds blended, and exploring performance techniques. So what you're watching here is Maggie, one of the fantastic actors, explaining in the post-show Q&A how she controlled her character, which was Cobweb, which is, as you can see, effectively a giant eyeball as a character, with the cobwebs as her lashes. And the way she is controlling that character is by, as I mentioned, she's in a Vicon rig. It's a motion capture. She's wearing a motion capture suit, and she's effectively moving her hands and her body. So the way she moves in the volume controls the different characteristics of her avatar. So she can open and close her eyes. She can become bigger or smaller, and we can play with scale and with movement and with all of those kind of different emotions that actors tend to have the ability to play with on the stage. If you go to the next slide. And so this is just an example of how we played with scale. So this is Puck and Cobweb in the virtual world together. And for us, you know, it's really interesting to be able to explore, you know, what it feels like to become smaller in virtual worlds, what it feels like to become bigger, and how we give you a kind of different emotional feeling depending on that. So Puck in this world is very much smaller than they are when you see them in the forest. Okay. So this is another example of how we used another technology to explore facial capture. So looking at a kind of quite a simple rig of a face and a simple piece of technology with using a phone, we captured this actor's Lauren's face, and she could kind of live. Obviously, everything's live, but she's live, kind of expressing and talking as her character, which is Mustard Seed. She manifested as a underground mycelial network, so the roots of the forest that we were exploring. So again, building this kind of 7 kilometer by 7 kilometer forest allowed us to go to the canopy underground, explore the kind of different textures and worlds that we might find within that forest ecosystem, but also create characters out of the different parts of it. And where the technology kind of came in to help us in terms of performance technologies, we just allowed us to kind of create these much more expressive kind of worlds, I guess. And so although a very, very talented actor, she basically used her face only for the whole show, which is, like, I think, an interesting challenge for her too there. So moving on, we also had, for example, Moth. The character Moth was made entirely out of moths, and he, Jurassic, the actor for that, controlled all of the size of the moth and the way that the moths manifested all through his arms. For the interactive version of the show, we used 3JS or WebGL overlay onto the virtual world. And then so the Unreal world and the interactive layer could talk to each other. So you as the audience could launch fireflies or seeds into the world, and the actors could then engage with that to some degree. And then I think finally, it's just worth also touching on the back end, or the kind of more invisible technologies that we had played with and then embedded in the show. So we were effectively exploring virtual production from very many angles. Firstly, show control, which was a huge part of any live performance in normal circumstances, but especially exciting for us to explore here. Show control was a massive challenge. Like, how does a show caller work in a virtual or an online world versus a kind of very analog stage show? So we did loads of work around skills in that kind of area, and learning to collaborate, but also we effectively built the show control system completely in Unreal to allow us to control all aspects of the live show effectively, like a multi-layered game, a multiplayer game. We've talked about character control. We've talked about live motion capture, and the kind of, as the real-time live motion capture there was a kind of critical element. In addition to this, we had sonic and sound kind of real-time audio processing and real-time visual effects. So, for example, the forest that you can see on the right-hand side here is sometimes stormy. It's sometimes kind of flashes of lightning, and it's sometimes calm, and playing with what we could do in a real-time context, so everything on sliders, allowed us to create this really dynamic and live virtual world. And in addition to that, there was live real-time lighting in the space, so in the interactive volume the actors could get a sense of what was happening in that virtual world too. So I mean, effectively, in summary, the challenge of converting this quite dry, very technical 7 by 7 meter square in Portsmouth into this kind of beautiful, dynamic, living and breathing forest that you see on your screens, or you were there with us, was our biggest challenge. And hopefully we've given you some insights into some of the tech we use to do that. Oh, there you go. That was my last slide. Sorry, Gabby.
That's okay. What a slide to hand over to. So yeah, I mean, as Nell's talked about, we developed a really complex, data-heavy 3D world, and one of the challenges we had was giving audiences access to that. So, we wanted to not only reach large numbers of people online, but we wanted to develop a meaningful, immersive experience. And actually, to deliver those two objectives is quite challenging. So we discovered, we explored various options for distribution and decided to go down a web browser route. And this was really to also address the digital inequity, I think, that was playing out during lockdown. That we were seeing some people who were able to experience immersive experiences via headset, phone, and others that couldn't. So much of the work that we did to develop the web presence was really informed by research that we undertook actually in lockdown, which was led by I2 Media at Goldsmiths and Nesta, which was looking at what audiences wanted to experience during that period of time, but also looking at how consumption was changing in lockdown. And it took into consideration everything from mood and sentiment to the kind of devices people felt confident using. And what we got from that was some key findings that when it went on to inform what was the user experience for the audience journey online. So some key takeaways from that was, the majority of audiences wanted some passive content, but there was a highly motivated audience that wanted more interactive content. So Nell has talked through that, why we then went on to develop two different experiences, which gave people the opportunity to choose. There was a real interest in the live experience, but also as live, and the interplay between pre-record and live. And so we're, as Sarah said, we're releasing the work online, but at a later date. But that was something that we looked through pre-recorded video as well in terms of the web experience. And then a sense of togetherness. People wanted a moment to connect with other audiences. So while that relationship between audience and performer was important, what was equally important was creating a moment where audiences could potentially connect with each other, or at least see each other. So there were, as you can see through this audience experience timeline, there was an onboarding moment, a moment where people became acquainted with that virtual world, where they got a sense of what the level of interaction was, but also got a sense of context. And something that we saw play out quite a bit within lockdown, certainly with a lot of virtual events, was the lack of a sense of place and a sense of belonging. And so what this did was it really introduced that world to the audience. And then, and then a moment at the end, which was just very, very much about meeting the artists and the creative team behind the work. So, yeah, I mean, delightfully, we had some great press coverage. Everything from, we got coverage in the BBC, The Guardian, Radio 4. But I think for us, what's always so important is actually how do audiences respond. And and just to sort of speak to, you know, what we thought worked was the onboarding process, and a lot of responses that we got from audience was that moment where they could really see other people joining the event. And I think, you know, when you talk about immersive environments and immersive worlds, you know, the ability to transform and transport people to virtual spaces, to worlds is critical. And we felt that we got that a lot with the feedback from audiences. You see lots of screens, they have their setup, and there's moments where they're trying to, in terms of the online and social media feedback was, you know, there's a lot of joy from sharing their experience while watching Dream. I think the other thing to just mention is, you know, yeah, and so, yeah, that's just a great picture that Sarah's just shared of glasses of wine alongside watching a production. What's really exciting for us right now is we're beginning to pull together all the findings from our research. So we're going to develop a toolkit which we can share with the wider sector. There was lots of areas that didn't make the cut within the Dream production that we really want to further explore, and that includes the levels of immersion that we could create and make available to audiences. So while we talked about a passive and interactive screen, obviously there are other experiences that we would still like to explore, be that through headset, but the ability to do that within a tight turnaround was extremely difficult. But other areas of development that we're very keen on sharing include everything from innovations in spatial audio, facial capture as a performance tool, virtual production and data capture, and and certainly where we think there's areas and room for growth is around accessibility. So how do we make these immersive experiences as accessible for everybody? So in summary, for those who didn't get to see it, the VOD is available next week. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand over back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Gabby and Nell, for a brilliant sharing of our work. And if we could take our screen, that'd be awesome. It's been a huge piece of research and development, and I wanted to come back on Nell's point about Dream was one of the deliverables, but there were also many other partners in the mix over the last few years. And Dream has been what I'd call our large scale presentation. And we had three compelling things that came back from our audiences at the time of our massive pivot to an online performance, which was audiences are craving liveness, they're craving togetherness, and there's a huge digital inequity. But I'd also like to sort of get also draw upon Nell and Gabby, your R&D within the festival, Manchester Festival and Skepta, and also the deformable object tracking in particular that Marshmallow Laser Feast have been pioneering, because actually what we found is those three components have been with us all the way through. Actually, they were there pre-pandemic, they're in the pandemic, and they're coming out of that. And Gabby, I'll start with you. If we could just talk about the Skepta performance that you did back in the festival. And the festival's coming back, isn't it, in July? And it's this is a busy time for you, so we're lucky to have you.
Yeah, we're 2 weeks before the festival, so I'm barely speaking English here. But 2 years ago, we started this research really with a similar challenge to what we were trying to solve with Dream, which is how do we scale up a mixed reality experience for a live performance? And with Skepta, for many of you who don't know, he's known for developing these really visceral rhyme performances, and was really excited about how he could embed this technology into a gig environment. And one of the challenges we had was an obvious direction of travel would have been to look at augmented reality or more location-based experiences in the venue. But he really wanted to deliver an experience without phones. And this is, it probably feels quite foreign and alien now, but remember when we used to go to gigs and people had phones out, and he was really very keen to remove the phones from any kind of live experience, that you could have that intimacy with the performer and the audience. So we explored a range of different technologies, but started looking at scaling up a lot of our volumetric projection and 3D content to develop holograms that really formed part of the base of his set, the structure of his set. And a lot of the volumetric content that we created were obviously from Skepta himself, and we used some of the 3D models actually that he'd been, some of his creative team had developed. So we went on a really interesting journey with that, which was how do you not use devices, but use infrastructure instead to develop large-scale mixed reality experiences, and to develop intimacy and connection without those kinds of without that kind of technology involved. So I think a lot of that thinking we started actually embedding within what would have been the in-person experience of Dream, and actually some of the ritual, the choreography of the audience, we still thought about in terms of the user and audience experience journey for the Dream website. But it certainly fed into some of our thinking, and I now know not to develop Magic Leap experiences for a club environment where you've got a lot of haze and smoke. So we learned a lot in that process too.
We certainly did. Now over to you, because obviously Marshmallow Laser Feast have been pioneering some really interesting R&D in this space around connection and virtual connection with other work alongside Dream.
Yeah, so we we came into the consortium looking at or with a sort of passion about props basically, and tactile virtual objects. So this is a kind of endeavor we've been researching since sort of mid 2017. We're interested in object deformation, or I guess more importantly, we're interested in how is the world that we live in always going to, the virtual world we inhabit, always going to be kind of glass or plastic and hard, because that isn't the lived experience of us in our real life, nor does it give a true sense of what touch or a true sense of what our real worlds offer us. And so we've been exploring, what does object deformation, so changing shape and tactility, really, what could that mean when as we develop our virtual worlds? And that led us, obviously, within our work packages with Audience of the Future, to build kind of different virtual worlds and explore characters with different properties, very like soft and squidgy kind of characters that we can explore, or different ways of pulling back curtains where you in a real world you've got a kind of thick and theatrical curtain maybe, and in a virtual world that takes on a different behavior and different property. And just like with Gabby and the work they'd done, we were very much expecting to build that into a an interactive world that we were going to build in Stratford with the RSC, and obviously all of that completely changed, and we pivoted. So we pivoted our research to look at how you would bring those characteristics of the props or the character to in augmented reality, and that actually never made it into Dream per se itself. But I think how the characters like Cobweb and Mustard Seed manifest themselves, really in terms of creative thinking, that's really where that started to come in. What we need to think about is what those interfaces look like for people in the home. So we developed a pig, which is not your average Shakespearean character, but we developed this kind of this very kind of soft and squidgy pig that you could basically inhabit. So it's an AR layer that you can put over another person, and that person could kind of puppeteer this pig and move it around. And now what we're interested in is what else do we need to do to kind of really bring that into the home? What does that mean? Or bring that to the so, you know, like, do we need to create a kind of soft object, bodied object, where you can also control its virtual counterpart? So there's lots of ways we can start exploring this. And I think what Dream offered us was a massive challenge in that if you can't control the audience experience in person, how do you start to bring those same lines of thinking or lines of inquiry into distant experiences, so online experiences, and how do you have that conversation with your audience, which is definitely a interesting challenge.
And picking up from that, one of the things that was really interesting to us is that we were using the most cutting edge immersive technologies, but there is a huge digital inequity, which you picked up on, Gabby and Nell, and that we had to design this for, you know, a very, very old phone or desktop, and then the most, you know, the newest models on the market, and there needed to be an equity in that experience. But also that homes have become cultural spaces, haven't they? More so than ever, more so than we realized, and actually they're not our spaces and how we enter them. And Gabby, I just wondered if you had any reflections there from Dream and also your work at Manchester.
Yeah, well, I think we had, you know, in the evaluation process of thinking about areas that we would like to grow, and that there was a real mutual interest, both from you, Sarah, and Nell, in considering what those location-based experiences could be in the home. What would happen to extend that reality, you know, I think one of the key, I mean, it really excited me when we got some feedback from audiences, and we had I think it was like a 5-year-old of somebody that we didn't really know, but that gave us some comments around the production. And they said, you know, after the production, I really wanted to play with Puck, and Puck is obviously was one of the main characters in the production. And, you know, this just offers, I think, a really rich opportunity to go, actually, what happens when you can leave something for your audience, or you can offer assets that sit alongside a production for those different age ranges. And so I just think there's loads of opportunity with you know, playing with traditional broadcast, with extended reality, and those location-based experiences. There's a sweet spot there. And certainly, you know, as we develop more sophisticated digital characters, and ways in which we can extend those, we can create some efficiencies in terms of how we can create those experiences. It feels like, you know, there are models there which are really worth exploring and exciting. And then I think, you know, one of the other joys was just seeing with Dream in particular was, you know, the families watching the production. I mean, like, we only really saw the glasses of wine and the screens there, but we know that as people checked into the experience, you know, we asked how many people were watching, and what was lovely to see was those groups, and how I really think there is something around that, you know, community, and that the collectiveness, and how we can make more of that moving forward. So I think there's tons of exciting possibilities, I think, but, you know, the key is obviously those different layers of access and immersion that we can offer, so we can, you know, ensure everyone can access the work in some capacity. So while we're super excited about the evolutions of the emerging technology, equally as excited in terms of democratizing access to that. And I think that's where Dream did really tick the box.
And just a final note, one of the really not expected delights, but one of the brilliant things has been the collaboration itself, and working with you both has been an absolute pleasure. And I think that as much as this was a research and development program looking at cutting edge technology, actually what we were able to do is look at new systems, infrastructures, models for how arts organizations can collaborate. And, you know, now I know we've had I think it has, and Gabby has allowed us to genuinely explore making something genuinely different. And I think that's been really exciting. And there's some key takeaways, I think, from the value of that, isn't there, for an audience as well, to put something out there that not only is using new technology, but thinking differently in how we make our work.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. For us, you know, as a studio, we approached everything, you know, we come from a live background for sure, like, you know, in various disciplines, but lots of what we did was about totally controlling that end-to-end visitor experience, or or the experience of the audience from the moment they walk in to how they decompress right through the installations, and using the interactive technologies and out the other side. And we had to relearn what that was. And Gabby talked about ritual before, and Sarah, I know you love talking about rituals, but we had to relearn what that was. And I think we learned from, you know, our collaborations with the guys who were at Magic Leap around writing games and understanding how they kind of brought people into their worlds. We learned from traditional theatre practices, but really it's just kind of allowed us to kind of think so differently. And now we can't go back, right? We can't go back as creators to go into that safe, or not necessarily safe, but that known environment. What we have to do is understand how we blend those things going forward. And hopefully with the sharing that Gabby, and the toolkit that Gabby mentioned, we can start to impart some of that learning so other people in the sector can really progress it and take it forward too.
Yeah,
amazing, thank you. And on that note, it was a genuine partnership of 14 partners. Many people employed and delivered this. I think we calculated about 375 people worked on Dream, but even behind that, there were huge amounts of support. People that became studios and evolved their own practice, fellows. There were so many components to that. And I think that we're, as much as Dream is a example of what was done, the toolkit that will be shared and the shared learnings we're really committed to, that will come out in September, hopefully will be looking at like how we actually share back with our community what's done and what's evolving here. As Nell says, we're not looking back, we're very much looking forward, and we're up for what's next in that sense. And on that note, I'd like to thank Nell and Gabby, and hand back to Janet.
Thank you so much to the dream team of Sarah, Gabrielle and Eleanor. And how fascinating to see this R&D case study of live performance in a virtual world, where you're designing differently, thinking differently, storytelling differently, connecting differently, where creativity meets technology. What you've done here is create a prototype for many performances to come, and a model for many to take forward in their own innovation programs. It's a fantastic result. And I, for one, can't wait to get hold of that pre-record, which I think you said is coming out next week, but will be available till September. And in September to learn from your learnings. Thanks so much. What a wonderful example of collaboration. 373 people in total, led by you. Thank you.